you watched our last video, you've already taken your first steps into Python programming. Now let's take it up a notch. In this video, we'll build on what we've learned and explore loops, casting, and more. So stick around. Hello and welcome. I'm Mr. Crook, and this is Programming Mr. Crook, the channel where I teach programming concepts and exam techniques to help you succeed. Today, we're going to build on our Python knowledge by learning about casting, for loops, and while loops. These are all essential skills for solving real programming problems. By the end of this video, you'll be able to confidently use both for loops and while loops in Python. In our last video, we learned how to create variables and ask for user input. We also created some selection statements as well. But if you missed it, you can check it out by looking at my YouTube channel. But anyway, here's a quick recap of what we built. We had an output statement here using the print function where we output a string. We created a variable where we asked the user to enter some data and we would store that in a variable here. We could also output that variable as we've got here. We also used the ask the user to enter their age, print out their age, and then we've got a very, very simple selection statement just using yes or no, where we can get our program to branch. Within this lesson, we're going to build on some of these concepts, so it's really important that you've checked out the lesson before if you haven't. So we're going to get started with the lesson. I'm using Google Colab and I'm just going to open up a new notebook. If you don't know how to do that, you can just click File and choose New Notebook in Drive, and that will give you this blank file that we're going to use. Now I'm also just going to make sure that I've got the AI generator turned off, so I'm going to click onto the cog. I'm just going to go onto AI Assistance and I'm just going to say click Hide Generative AI Features. Now I'm going to start typing out a simple kind of program. I'm going to create two variables called num1. I'm going to ask the user to input some numbers, and what we're going to try and do is add these together. So I'm just going to say please enter a number. Now I'm going to create a second variable called num2, and I'm going to ask the user to enter a second number. So I'm just going to say please enter another number. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and add these two numbers together. So what I'm going to say is print, and I'm just going to say num1 plus num2. Now when we click run, there's going to be a problem with this, and I want you to see if you can identify what the problem is. So I'm going to run this, and I'm going to enter in the numbers 8 and 7 when it runs. So here we go. For 8 is going to be into our first number, so num1 is going to contain the value 8. And I'm going to enter another number. I'm going to enter 7. Now let's have a look at what we get as the output. We get 87. I want you just to have a think, why is this? Well, the reason is we're actually capturing the data as a string. So a string just means text. So it's actually seeing these values as text. But we want the program or the computer to be able to see these as something called an integer. So an integer is just going to be a whole number. Now I just noticed I had a capitalized L there, so I'm just going to change that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to Python that when I capture this data and store it, I want it to be casted as an integer. So this is just us telling the program language what we want it to see or how we want it to handle the data. By default, it will capture it as a string, but we're going to now tell it to capture it as an integer. This is going to allow us to carry out some calculations. So when I press run, and I enter those same values, 8, and I also enter 7, we should now get the correct result because we've used this process called casting. Now, this is just the process of converting a data type to another data type. We had a string, and we just said that when we're entering that data, store it as an integer. Now, this might make a bit more sense as you go along a bit further with your programming journey, but it's quite an important concept to understand as we're going forward. Today, we're going to be capturing some values as integers, so we are going to be using this casting process. So we've looked at casting. We're also going to look at how we can generate some random numbers as well. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a library, and I'm going to import it into our program. Now, Python is really good at having a lot of other libraries that you can use. We're just going to use something called the random library, which is going to generate some random numbers for us today. And just to show you how that can take place, I'm going to create a variable called random number. And I'm going to say random. So this is where us referencing the library. And I'm going to say from this library, I want you to generate a random integer. So we've already looked at what an integer is. So it's just a whole number. and I can give it a range. I'm going to say generate a random number between 1 and 10. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to output that random number. So I'm just going to type this into here. And when I press run, it's generated the number 8. Let's run it again. Hopefully we'll get a different number. 2, 8, 7, 6. So we've got some random numbers taking place there. So that's great. So there's two things we've looked at so far. There's casting and we're generating random numbers. These are going to be things which we're going to look at for today's lesson. Now the first concept that we're going to look at today is going to be creating a for loop. Now we're going to create two types of loops today. We're going to create a for loop and a while loop. And for loop is where we can get some code to repeat a set number of times. Now here I've been generating some numbers. I might want to use this later. I'm still going to be using this a bit later, so I'm going to keep this import random here. But what I'm going to say is I'm going to say for I in range. I'm going to say 3. This means I want it to repeat 3 times. I'm going to put a colon here. And notice that when I press enter, similar to our selection statement, it indents our code here. This is the line where we're going to start telling it, when this part starts repeating, what do you want to repeat? I'm just going to print out the words hello. So what we should get is we should get 3 strings of hello being printed out. Hello, hello, hello. And what I can also do is I can print out on a second line some other text as well. So I could say hello world. So we should get hello world, hello world, hello world being printed out. And the final thing, which I'm going to do, I'm just going to go down 2 lines and I'm going to hit my backspace button. And I'm just going to show you that this line here is going to be the end of our program. So I'm just going to say exit. Now what we've got here is we've got this indentation and we're telling it whatever code we've indented here, we want this to repeat 3 times. Once it's run that, it's going to go back to here and it will output this command. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate 2 random numbers and I'm going to ask the user if they can work out what this calculation is. So I'm going to say num1 and we're going to say random.rand int. I'm going to generate a number between 1 to 10 and I'm going to generate another number called num2 and I'm also going to say random.rand int and let's do 1 to 10 here. Now, every time that we do this, we're generating 2 random numbers. We don't know what they're going to be. So I'm just going to say the result is going to be equal to num1 and num2. And what I'm going to ask the user to do is I'm going to ask the user to see if they can perform this calculation. So I'm going to say print what is num1. And I'm just going to use the plus symbol there between these speech marks. And I'm going to say num2. And I think I'm just going to use a question mark here to do it. Now, what we can use here is we can create a variable, and this is going to be the user's guess. So I'm just going to say answer equals, we're going to want it to be captured as an integer. So I'm going to say input, and I'm just going to give the user a message, and I'm going to say enter your answer. So let's run that. Got an error here, so I'm just having a look. Name num is not defined. Oh, I know why. I need to just make sure I reference num1, otherwise it won't work. So we've got this result, and that would be 11. Let's generate another random number for us to answer, and we've got this final one. Now, what I want to do, and this is going to go back to lesson 1, I want us to see if we can create a variable called score. And I want us to give the user some feedback whether they've got this right or wrong. Because at the moment, it just generates 2 random numbers and asks us to answer. It doesn't really give us any user feedback. So you can pause the video here, or you can skip ahead and you can see my solution. Okay, so we want to be able to store the score of this. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to create a variable called score, and I'm going to assign it 0. When the user answers this program, I'm going to use an if statement, and I'm going to say, well, is the value that they just entered, is that equal to the result? Because that will automatically add that there for us. So if answer is equal to the result, I'm going to use a colon here, I'm just going to output to the user, correct. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to increment the score by 1. Now you can write score plus equals 1, or you can also just write it as score equals score plus 1. Now the other possible option is that they've got it wrong. So I'm just going to use an else statement here, and I'm going to print wrong. to the user. We're not going to change the score, but what I am going to do once the program finishes, I'm just going to write you scored, and we can just say what the score is. And because it's going to be out of 3, we can just say out of 3. So I'm going to test it through once. I'm hopefully going to get these all correct. So 3, 14, and 2. So we should have 3 out of 3. Let's rerun this program. We should have 11. We should have 11 again. And let's get one wrong. I don't know, 68. Wrong. So we only got 2 out of 3. So I think that that program is running, which is great. So we've looked at a for loop. We've been able to tell it to loop that many times. We could change that value if maybe we wanted to generate 10 questions. We'd also need to just update that value there, but that would work. So with our for loop, these are really useful for programmers if you know how many times you want something to repeat for. However, if you're not too sure how many times you want something to repeat for, another type of loop called a while loop might be the most appropriate. Now I'm going to show you how to write one of these very quickly. I'm going to try and create a basic login system where you need to enter the correct password to be able to log in. So we could say secret password. This is going to be our variable. And I'm just going to give it the really bad password of being equal to password. Hopefully no one has that as their password. Now, what we can also do is we can create a variable which is going to be the user's guess or the user's entry. And I'm just going to have this as an empty string. And what I can say is that while guess is not equal to the secret password, we can get this to loop. Now, in real life, this probably wouldn't be the most appropriate, but if we want something to keep looping while condition is correct, we can get this to happen. And what we're going to ask the user to do is enter their password. So we're just going to say input. I'm not casting anything just now. I'm just going to enter this as a string. And I'm going to say enter password. Now, we could combine this with an if statement if we want to, but at the moment, we can just have this looping here. So it's not going to allow us to log in, but if we enter password as the password, the program will stop running. Now, just to show you that, we could even have a print statement here, just then logged in or something like that, just to indicate when that happens. But because this has stopped looping, we can tell that the program has actually stopped running now. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to try and create a game. Now, we are going to use a while loop to create this game. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to generate a random number between 1 and 100. We're going to try and get the user to guess this value, and we're going to try and get the program to keep track of how many guesses they've had, and get the user to enter their guess and see if they can work out the secret number. So let's call this secret number, and again we can generate a random integer, so random.randint. I'm going to generate a number between 1 and 100. What we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called attempts, which is going to be how many times the users guess this. And I'm also just going to print out a statement to the user and say, I am the computer. I have chosen a number between 1 and 100. Let's do the second line. Can you guess it? Now, what I need to do is I need to create a variable here that's going to keep track of the user's guess, basically. So this is going to be equal to guess, and I'm just going to set that to 0. We could do it as an empty string. And now I'm going to do my loop condition. So I'm going to say while guess, so this is where the user is going to be guessing, and we're going to say is not equal to the secret number. We're going to ask the user to enter a guess. So let's say guess equals int. Remember, because we want it to be a number, we're going to say input, and I'm just going to output to the user enter guess. That will get stored in the variable guess, and we're going to use an if statement here, or a selection statement. So I'm going to say, well, if that guess is, well, let's do it first that it's greater than the secret number. So we've got a secret number here. I'm just going to output too high. I'm going to do an elif statement, which means else if. And I'm going to say if the guess is less than the secret number. I'm going to print too low. I could use an else statement here. I think I'm going to go with an elif statement. And I'm going to say elif statement. This means that the guess is equal to the secret number. We're going to print, you got it. Now I think I'm just going to capitalize these just to make this a little bit better. And let's run this. So let's see if this works. Now we don't know what this user number is, so I'm going to go for the number 7. It's too low, so that means my guess needs to be higher. Let's go for 80. Oh wow, I got it, okay. Let's try running it another time. Now remember, I don't know what these numbers are going to be. I'm going to go for 81. It's too high. Well, let's go for 45. It's still too high. Let's go for 27. It's too high. Let's try 1. It's too low. Maybe 10. It's too low. Let's go for 15. It's too high. 12. Too low. 14. Too high. So I think we've got that as 13. All right. Now, what I want to do is I want to add something to this program. So I want you to create a variable that's going to increment the number of attempts. We've already got this variable here called attempts. Let's also change the spelling of that as well. And I want you to increment that value by 1 every time the user enters a guess. When the program is finished running, I want you to output to the user how many attempts it took them to guess that number. Now you can stop the video here and you can try and implement that yourself, or you can just skip ahead and you can watch me implement the solution. Okay, so here we go then, guys. So every time that this loop runs, I want to increment attempts by 1. I'm just going to do that plus equal sign, which will get it here. Now here, if I press backspace, this is going to be what code continues after that loop has run. So I'm just going to output to the user. That took you, and I'm going to enter attempts here. And let's just say goes. I'm just going to remove that comma there, just so it looks a little bit neater. And then we'll press run one more time. So I'm going to go for 50. Okay, it's too high. Let's try 25. It's still too high. Let's try 12. It's too low. Let's go 15. Too low. 20. And I got it. And down here, it shows me all of those guesses that I've got here. I can just run that if you didn't quite see that. So we can enter a value here. So do 50. It's too high. Let's go 25. It's too low. 37 is too low. 42 is too high. Let's try 40. And I got it. And it took me 5 goes to get that. So there we go. Now, a couple of extensions which you guys can do on this. Why don't you try and adapt this program so that the computer is trying to work out the user's number on this. Now this can be a little bit tricky, especially if you're just joining your Python journey, but I think you should give this a go, see how you get on with this. So in today's lesson, we looked at casting data from a string into an integer, so we can use it for calculations. We also used a for loop and we created a simple maths program with that. And we also built a while loop to create a guess the number game. We looked at a number of different things which we can do there. Now, what I'd like you to do, if you want to try and extend this, I've already spoken about what you can do with the guess the number game, but what you could do is you could go back to the simple maths quiz and you could get it to handle subtraction or multiplication as well. If you found today's video useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you will be notified anytime I upload a new video. I just want to draw your attention to my TES page where I've got some free Python programming resources on here. I've also got some paid ones which you can check out. I'll leave the link in the description. See you guys next time. Have a great day.